Hello, 7th graders. This is the first review video of 3 videos for your Chapter 6 test. This will cover Learning Target 1, which is I can find the missing side of the right triangle using the Pythagorean theorem. So remember the Pythagorean theorem is saying a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And we named each side of a right triangle with a, b, and c. C is the only one that's really super important. A and B can be flip-flopped. It doesn't really matter which one's which. So we know C is always going to be this side, which is known in 2 ways. One is that it's the longest side. C is what we call the hypotenuse. So that is the longest side. And it also is always directly across from the right angle. I look at this right angle sign and I kind of think of it as like a little arrow pointing at the hypotenuse, pointing at C. Now, it doesn't matter if I name this side A and this side B or flip them around. It doesn't matter. So what I'm going to do in order to solve the Pythagorean theorem is first I need to know a little bit about a right triangle. All right triangles have where one of the sides squared, so let's call it 8 times 8, plus the other side squared, we'll call it 15 times 15. That's not quite a square, but you know what I mean. Equals this side squared, c times c. Okay, so why I'm drawing these big squares is saying that this one here and this one here, when we add up all of that space, we get the same amount of space as this one here. So this one is the same size as both of these two put together. And that's important because what we're going to do is we're going to take our side lengths and we're going to sometimes add them up in squared fashion and then find the square root. And other times we're going to subtract things out because if I wanted to know what B was, I could take C and I could subtract the part that belonged to A, and then I'm just left with the B squared, and I'd have to solve for that. So let's put it into action. If I'm saying a squared plus b squared equals c squared, what I like to do is I like to label them a, b, and c, and then just plug in what I know. So I know a is 8, so I'm going to say 8 squared. Plus, I know b is 15, so I'm going to say 15 squared. And c is my unknown value, so I have c squared over here. I'm going to treat this just like I would when I solve an equation by separating the two sides. I'm going to find out what is 8 squared plus 15 squared. So I'm grabbing my calculator here and I'm just typing in 8 squared plus 15 squared. I'm doing it all in one line. You can also do it all in one line as long as you have a calculator that has a squared button. So I got 289. That is equal to c squared. And while we were talking about this in class, a lot of times I wanted you to look at this picture and say, what makes sense for C? What makes sense for C to me might be somewhere around like maybe 18 or something bigger than 15, right? But probably smaller than 30. So a lot of times, I say that because a lot of times people will use this 289 as their answer. And if you look at it in the picture, it doesn't make any sense to be 289. That's way, way, way too big. So what step have I forgotten? Well, I now have c squared. I have what all of these little squares all together add up to, but all I want to know is what's the one side. So I'm going to do the opposite of squaring a number. I'm going to take the square root of the number. So I'm taking the square root of both sides. Okay, so on this side, the square root of 289 is 17. And on the other side, the square root of c squared is just c. So c equals 17. And whatever my units are is going to be my units here too. So 17 feet. Let's do another one. Okay, these two were also solving for c. So I'm going to label one of them a, one of them b, one of them a, one of them b. Okay, I'm going to say a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So I'm going to plug in for a, I'm going to plug in a 4 squared. For b, I'm going to plug in a 3 squared. And I don't know what c squared is. When I take 4 squared plus 3 squared, I get 25 is equal to c squared. and I want to get c by itself, so I'm going to find the square root. The square root of c squared is just c. The square root of 25 is 5 millimeters. So far, I've only shown you ones that are Pythagorean triples. Pythagorean triples are where the answers turn out to be exactly whole numbers, and they're nice and pretty. You are going to have some on your test that you will get ugly answers, and that's normal, and that's okay. So this next one's also a Pythagorean triple. So sorry that there's such nice, pretty answers when sometimes you won't get such pretty answers. But let's go ahead and plug these numbers in. So if I'm calling 8a, then I'm going to say 8 squared plus 6 squared equals c squared. 8 squared plus 6 squared equals 100. And I'm going to take the square root of both of those. 10 equals c, or 10 meters is the length of line C. Not all of the questions are going to be asking you to solve for C. In this case, we're trying to solve for B. We'll call it B because it's labeled B, but it could be the A as well, right? So what I want to do is one of two things. One, I could take my a squared plus b squared equals c squared and plug in what I know. Well, I'm going to call this one a, so 15 squared, and I don't know b, so I'm going to write b squared, and I'm going to call this one c. In fact, I have to call this one c because this is the hypotenuse. Okay, then on the one side, I can find out what is 15 squared, and write 225 plus b squared equals 289. So all I did was take those squares. Okay, I want to get b all by itself, so my goal is to first get rid of the 225 from both sides. And when I get rid of 225, I have 64 left on the right side. And on the left side, I have b squared. Take the square root of both, and b equals 8 feet. Oops, down here. Okay. The other way of thinking about this, so I said there were two ways we could think about this, and I kind of like the second way better. So instead of doing what I just did and solve for b, instead we could think about this from the very beginning and say, well, this is kind of like a fact family. If I ignored the squareds and I just say a plus b equals c, we could say c minus b equals a, right? Or c minus a equals b. And so the same thing applies when you add the squareds to it. So if I want to solve for b, I could just say, well, I'm going to take c squared minus, a squared equals b squared. And you're going to find that all I'm really doing is taking my 289 minus 225 right away in this step. And then I'm going to get my 64 where I've solved. So it kind of just takes one step away, even though you did have to think that step through. So again, I'm just taking my 17 squared minus my 15 squared equals b squared. This side will be 64. This side is b squared. Find the square root of each, and 8 is equal to b. All right, that's it for this target. Stay tuned. There's 2 more videos and 3 more targets.